Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, we are honoring military chaplains. We're joined by Richard Hall, a filmmaker who has a new movie, Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey. He has teamed up with actor Chris Pratt to bring this film to life. It tells the incredible story of military combat chaplains. We'll get into that and more in just a moment. Let's welcome Richard Hall. So Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey, where did the idea come from for this documentary?
Well, it's been a 4-year journey for me, and I was brought into this by my friends at Paulus Productions, which is a nonprofit LA-based production company. It's been around for 60 years, and it was started by a Catholic priest. And they wanted to make a documentary about military chaplains. And I knew nothing about military chaplains. I didn't even know that that existed as a profession. And I had made a documentary years ago with Halle Berry about Black soldiers that had fought in all the U.S. wars we ever had. And Halle and I had won the NAACP Image Award for that and some other awards. And I think Paulus thought that I had perhaps a bit of credibility and trust with the military. And so they asked me to come on. And the more I got to know the subject matter, the more I fell in love with it. And I thought, this is a movie that not only do I want to produce, but I also want to direct and be the storyteller behind it. And so I had been aware of a combat chaplain story named Jeff Struecker from the movie Black Hawk Down. And I found a way to get in touch with him and said, hey, could I tell your story? And he said, yeah, of course. And then I spent some time with the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps, and they said, yeah, we've got some stories that you can tell. And Chris Pratt signed on, and everybody I talked to kept saying yes. And it just created this groundswell. And here we are, 4 years later, kind of bringing the journey to a bit of an end as the movie comes out on Friday in theaters nationwide.
You know, Rich, I got to tell you, you said something at the top that I think is so interesting. And I would bet a lot of people, watching or listening to this would say, okay, I don't really know a lot about chaplains either. Like, I kind of know what they do, but particularly in military, and I know obviously the film is going to get into all of this, but as you were journeying through over the 4 years, what did you learn? What was the most shocking thing that you learned about these chaplains who are out there doing incredible work?
Well, you're right. It is a story, a subject matter that not a lot of people know. And I think there's a reason for that. So on the one hand, chaplains go into combat wearing a uniform, but not carrying a weapon, which you got to scratch your head and go, why would anybody do that? It's a profession that obviously you don't just do for a paycheck. You do it for some higher calling. And calling is the word we use in the movie, and that's probably a pretty good word. I'm not even sure you can put why they do it into words. And so, but their workplace is sort of at the collision of this very opposite thing, which is the chaos of war. And I just didn't think that we had ever explored that cinematically before. And that's really what was so interesting for me. And so there have been 419 chaplains that have died throughout U.S. history, fighting in every U.S. battle we've ever had. The chaplains were started by George Washington, and so they've been around for a long time. And, I'm a non-veteran. My dad is a veteran. My family members are veterans. But every veteran I talk to has got a story about a chaplain. And that may just be a small moment where the chaplain influenced their life, or it could be a big moment where the chaplain saved their life. But chaplains are really revered in the military, and it's hard for people outside the military to know that. And so I'd say probably the biggest thing I learned is also the biggest challenge that we had, which is pulling the stories out of the chaplains because they don't like to be part of the story traditionally. And that's why we don't know their stories. They like the spotlight to shine on the soldiers who they're there to serve, and those soldiers serve us as Americans, and that's the way they like it. So pulling these things out turned out to be very difficult, but also one of the more interesting things about the movie. And ultimately, I think what I learned about them is also sort of the call to action in the movie, which is that one person can make a difference. And, as we say in the movie, sometimes what a chaplain does is they're just present and they're dealing with these moments of life and death with soldiers, young and old, and families. And it's really intense and it's really powerful and it's very existential. And a chaplain may come from a particular faith, and all faiths are represented in the chaplain corps of all the different military branches. It's, Christian and Catholic and Protestant and Jewish and Muslim and you name it. But when you're on the battlefield, you're dealing with soldiers of all faiths and no faiths. And it's a real opportunity for people of faith to live their life in a very, faith forward way. It's an incredibly unique example of living your faith. And all of that was just so interesting to me that I just couldn't say no to it. It just really captivated me as a storyteller.
Yeah, it's so interesting looking at this because people will have all sorts of debates, and I've heard debates about the separation of church and state, and you shouldn't have chaplains. But the reality is chaplains, as you said, going back to George Washington, they have actually been part of, and you mentioned every faith being represented, they have been part of the American fabric. In the Senate, in the House of Representatives, they have a chaplain. They've had a chaplain since before we had America, essentially serving. So it's interesting, though, in the context of war, because you mentioned life and death. Human beings are complicated, right? It's not just the temporal. There are spiritual needs that people have. And when you're fighting wars, to have these individuals there to help people navigate, as you were saying, their faith, the issues that they're dealing with, it seems like an essential thing for people. It doesn't just seem, I think some people might look at chaplains like, oh, that's nice, or it's just this addendum. This actually feels to me, and I'll be biased here, like something that we absolutely have to have in the context of the military. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all.
I think you're right. I mean, if you think about it, chaplains are everywhere throughout the military in all branches. They're on military bases, they're at military hospitals, they're dealing with families at home. But the combat chaplains are really the tip of the spear. They're the ones that are out there dealing with soldiers on the front line. And I think that is unique and in sort of the world that we live in. And yet, if you look around the world, every single military has their own version of chaplains. And so it really makes this a very universal story, I think. And I've been going around the country for the last few months doing advanced screenings of the movie. So I get to see how different types of audiences react to the movie. We actually started the advanced screening tour by screening the movie at the Pope's house in Rome. And the Pope has a screening room in his house. And who knew that? That was a bit of a head scratcher for me. And Vatican City has their own set of theaters, but this is the one in the inner sanctum of the Pope. And so you walk through the Swiss Guard and you feel the weight of history on you. And it made my Catholic mother very proud. And you sit in this screening room that was built in 900 AD. It was an old chapel. And it was just such an incredible honor to kick off our advanced screening tour. And then as I've continued doing that, I see military audiences and faith-based audiences and general audiences who have no connection to the military or faith. And when the lights come up in these theaters, there's a lot of emotion, which is, very powerful for me. And I see the military audiences I think they start with a reaction of, oh my gosh, this kind of makes me think about my experience in the military. And sometimes that can be painful. And by the end of the movie, they're tears of joy. And I think what they say is, well, this gives voice to my experience in the military in a way that I maybe couldn't have. And it helps me convey to my family, my friends, my community, what I went through. And then I think for the faith-based people, it really is that opportunity to kind of hang a lantern on people who live their faith every day. And that's pretty unique. And I'd say for general audiences, they love the journey into, and there's that word, right? It's in the title of the movie. I think everybody takes a journey on this movie, me as a filmmaker. But I think they love that journey of going into this world that they didn't even know existed, as you point out. and learning about it. And of course, I'm biased, but I think that they respond to the storytelling as well. And so all of these things have really led to a bunch of very powerful reactions. And I think part of it too is just the authenticity of the way we tried to approach these stories. I mean, as a non-veteran, I partnered with a veteran named Justin Roberts, who is a former Army combat chaplain. He co-directed the movie with me, and we wanted to make sure that we were viewing everything through a veterans focused lens, so it would all feel very authentic. And that was really important to us as well. And look, we tell some of the positives and some of the negatives. I mean, there's a lot that happens with chaplains because, as we say in the movie, when you go to war, you're going to come back a very different person, and war can leave scars on your soul.
Because they're seeing all the same things that whether you have a weapon or not, you're seeing. And in fact, they may see even more of it because they're called in to help, I would imagine, in the most difficult situations, right? So they're human beings seeing the unthinkable often.
I think you're right. And in the movie, one of the chaplains refers to that as compassion fatigue, which I think is a really interesting phrase because you got to think about, well, if the chaplains are out there serving the soldiers, who's serving the chaplains? Wow. And so, and they're humans. And so we have to sort of deal with that as well. And we tell that other side of the story because we wanted the movie to have authenticity. I think that's what gives it so much power, is that it's not just a, one-sided love letter to the Army Chaplain Corps. It is a true look at what these people as humans go through and the power that they have. And that's, that's kind of one of my takeaways from the movie, which is that one person can make a difference. And in some respects, that's sort of the call to action as we go into Veterans Day and the movie comes out in theaters nationwide. Pick up the phone on Veterans Day, call your veteran friends, call your veteran family, check in on them, see how they're doing, tell them what their service means to you. Like, to me, that's an example of one person being able to make a difference. And that's kind of the ethos of what chaplains do.
So before we go, I want to ask you a little bit more about Chris Pratt, because obviously Chris Pratt's an A-list actor. People know him. He's also been a very outspoken proponent of military and America and the nation. And so getting him involved, how hard was that? How did that come about? Would love to just hear a little bit of his involvement in this project.
Well, this is my 28th movie as a producer, and it's my first as a director. And so I do know my way around Hollywood and have been doing this a while. And my one of my other partners, Daniel Snyder, who also produced the film, has been doing the same for about as long. And between the two of us, along with our partners at Paulus Productions, we know a few folks. And so I think it's a really good strategy for a documentary to try to bring in a person that's got a big platform, particularly if it checks all the right boxes and feels authentic. And Chris was that guy for us. He's a big military supporter. He's a very faith-forward guy. I mean, he really has a true heartfelt interest in telling these stories, most of which have never been told. And so I think the other thing that's interesting about it is, Chris has really tried to sort of calm the storm during the last few weeks of the presidential race. And he's been vocal about that. And I think that's part of the opportunity here. By putting the movie in theaters, yes, we are doing it because it's Veterans Day. That's pretty obvious. And it's a good way to go and celebrate veterans. But it's also a few days after the presidential election. And, you probably use a little healing here, all of us. And so forcing people to come into a movie theater together with folks who maybe they don't even agree on everything, but you can find common ground in the role that combat chaplains play and the heroic actions that they have. And so that's a great way to start conversations with your neighbors. It forces people to come together. And so that was very intentional because the movie is only available in theaters. You can't get it anywhere else, not on streaming. It's only available in theaters. And I think that's probably one of the things that Chris was responding to. And even larger than that, I might argue that we've made a superhero movie, but we don't have a superhero movie marketing budget. And so I think it's an opportunity for people to kind of vote, I guess, in a presidential election week. That's, a good word, but to vote by going to movie theaters this weekend on opening weekend. And when you buy a ticket, you send a signal to the theater owners, these are the kinds of movies I want to see in theaters, and I'm willing to show up, because right now people generally just go to movie theaters for superhero movies and maybe an occasional horror movie and maybe a animated family movie, but that's about it. And so if you're going and you're supporting a movie like this, you're going to see more of them. I mean, the theater owners are in the business of selling tickets, and so if they see a bunch of tickets being sold around a faith-based and military-focused movie that really deals with patriotism, they're going to give you more of them. And so I think that was another thing that Chris really sort of responded to as well.
Well, the movie is Fighting Spirit, A Combat Chaplain's Journey. Where can people go if they want to grab more information or get tickets?
Yeah, they can go to fightingspiritfilm.com. So it's fightingspiritfilm.com. There's a little button at the top that says get tickets, and you can put in your zip code and see the theaters near you that are playing it. And then bring your friends, tell your family, drag everybody, go see it. It's been a really fun experience for me to get to see all of these audience reactions. I'm proud of the movie. The reviews are coming out. They've all been excellent. We're just so honored to be able to bring all of these stories to Americans and to the world.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time. Again, it's Fighting Spirit. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.